Hello everyone, this is Francesco Tava. This is part of Data for Policy 2020, submission 98, Brave New Words, Ethics in Theory and Practice in Public Data Provision. I'll be talking about solidarity and data access, challenges and potentialities. I hope you'll enjoy the presentation, and I also hope to have soon the chance to talk about it more or less face-to-face, even though only virtually at the conference in September. The emergence of big data technologies and consequently of an increasingly more networked society has caused a paradigm shift in contemporary ethics. Traditional ethical theories, which relied on individual responsibility and decision-making, required a conceptual reframing insofar as new moral actors, like for instance artificial multi-agent systems, entered the moral domain, transforming it deeply. From this transformation, new big data-induced ethical models emerged, which soon took a central position in current philosophical debates. These include models of distributed morality, which allow ethicists to deal with the fact that due to systemic interactions among multi-agent systems, moral actions and responsibilities are no longer solely centered on individuals, but are rather distributed across society. In this presentation, I will first provide a brief analysis of these new models, highlighting both their main characteristics and the potential societal effects. In doing this, I will particularly focus on the notion of infraethics. It's a notion that philosopher Luciano Floridi has recently developed in a series of articles on this topic. Infraethics, also known as infrastructure ethics, which indicates that, quote, first order framework of implicit expectations, attitudes, and practices that can facilitate and promote morally good decisions and actions. This is a quotation from one of the articles by Floridi on this matter. Among these practices, there is trust, respect, reliability, etc. In the second part, I will argue in favor of the inclusion of solidarity among such infraethical practices. In the third and last section, I will then contend that an infraethical model of solidarity might offer a powerful tool for tackling one of the most challenging issues that underpins our digital ways of living, i.e. the way in which we own and use digital data. So we come much closer to the conference's topic in a certain sense. Looking at one of the most advanced models of data access and governance, the EDRU model developed by Felix Ricci and Elizabeth Green, one can easily detect the growing importance that collective and societal aspects play in the domain of data access. So that will be my conclusion for today. So first part, distributed morality and infraethics. The concept of distributed morality refers to a phenomenon that is having an ever-increasing impact on today's society due to the emergence and dissemination of new information and communication technologies that span from digitization techniques to algorithmic decision-making. Our everyday life, both on the personal and societal level, is increasingly influenced by operations undertaken by artificial agents. I.e. by sufficiently informed, smart, autonomous artifacts able to perform morally relevant actions independently of the humans who engineer them, causing artificial good and artificial evil. This is another quote by an article written by Floridi. Interlinked technical innovations such as, for instance, big data technologies, deep learning, semantic web, and Internet of Things give rise to a variety of new agents, which are progressively less dependent on their creators, and which therefore play an independent role in the public sphere. This phenomenon alone has a major impact on pivotal moral concepts such as responsibility and power, whose relational rather than individual facet comes progressively to light. So from the individual as the center of morality to a more network participated notion of morality and ethics as such. This scenario is made even more complex by the formation of multi-agent systems, which can be human artificial or even hybrid, so both human and artificial. The fundamental assumption is that a series of small actions, which a number of agents, either human, artificial, or mixed, perform, and which taken individually are morally neutral or morally negligible, can originate morally loaded big actions, which can be either good or evil, as soon as they are embedded in a powerful multi-agent system. Assuming that, well, there are many examples of this, of course. This might sound quite technical, but actually it is not. Think, for example, of how petitions work these days, right? With just a one click, people are able to sign a petition, which is an action which per se is quite negligible and morally neutral, we might say. But thanks to other agents, other human agents, and also thanks to hybrid or artificial agents, like, for example, a technical infrastructure that allows to generate an online survey, an online petition, this action might end up creating a morally loaded petition. For example, a morally loaded action that ends up pushing a government, for example, to respond to this petition, right? So this is a clear example of how the combination of a series of actions which taken individually are not morally loaded, are not morally significant, can become significant as soon as we look at the system and not as the pure individual action per se. This is exactly what distributed morality can imply, both positively or negatively. Assuming that the majority of individual actions that human or artificial agents perform is merely morally neutral or negligible, the central challenge is in a distributed morality framework becomes how to ensure that the sum of these individual actions will originate a good rather than an evil outcome. This result can be achieved by strengthening the resilience and fault tolerance of our ethical environments, while weakening its inherent inertia. In other words, we have to learn how to identify possibly good actions and facilitate their aggregation into virtuous multi-agent systems. Whereas at the same time, we also have to isolate and neutralize possibly evil actions. To do that, we need to establish what Floridi calls infraethics, i.e., another quote from Floridi, a first order framework of implicit expectations, attitudes, and practices that can facilitate and promote morally good decisions and actions. These expectations, attitudes, and practices operate as moral enabler insofar as, although they do not necessarily require to be morally characterized either positively or negatively, they facilitate the aggregation of possibly good actions and the dispersion of possibly negative actions. Examples of such enablers are information transparency, privacy, trust online, openness, and so on and so forth. So this is a sort of open series of concepts. So there is not like a fixed definition yet. In what follows, I will contend that solidarity, as I conceive it, should be understood and as an infraethical phenomenon that can facilitate the emergence of positive moral behaviors in an environment characterized by distributed morality. So, what about solidarity? Why solidarity is so important? So there is no shared agreement on a definition of solidarity among experts, political philosophers, political theorists, social scientists. So it's a very contested concept in a certain sense. There is an ongoing discussion about what solidarity is and how solidarity practices and relations can be characterized. Solidarity relations are often described as historically grounded on a principle of equal and gratuitous support among peers. For example, people who establish a bond of solidarity must recognize a similarity in a relevant respect, according to other interpreters, which can correspond either to a similarity of features or to a similarity of motivation and agency. Other common traits include the mutual responsibility, the recognition of individual freedom, and the aim of democratically establishing this freedom. The attainment of positive duties such as cooperation and reciprocity, and also the willingness to take and share risks and costs in this operation, in the establishment of these solidarity relations. I think that at least the two elements stem from these characterizations, which I contend are essential to define solidarity relations. First, in order for people or institutions to trigger and set solidarity in motion, they must share certain goals and ideals of justice. In this sense, although acknowledging their shared status, for example, like compatriots, fellow workers, etc., although this acknowledgement might facilitate and strengthen solidarity bonds, the emergence of solidarity requires collectively aiming to overcome perceived inequalities or injustices that a certain social condition might involve. Second, the sharing of determined goals depends on the willingness of individuals and groups, and also share the costs and burdens that these goals might involve, with at least an expectation of reciprocity. This element helps differentiate solidarity from other intersubjective relationships, like, for instance, benevolence or charity. So solidarity implies this, at least an expectation of reciprocity and cost and risk sharing. On top of these two elements, we can also argue that the first one, the element one, motivates the element two, insofar as sharing goals or ideals incites the willingness to also share costs and risks with an eye towards longer-term gain and increasing probability of achieving and the shared goals. The willingness to shoulder burden and take risks in the aim of potentially longer-term political and social economic goals is furthermore supported in a virtuous circle by the sharing of the risk, which can also mitigate individual risk. Hence, solidarity facilitates collective decision-making, collective action, and longer-term political action and planning. All characteristics that can be described as desiderata within a democratic society. Solidarity is thus not just a descriptive notion that indicates a certain form of human togetherness, but a fundamental or infrastructural dimension of democratic life. This infrastructural dimension is what suggests that solidarity might be employed within an infraethical framework as a powerful moral enabler, as much as trust, as much as benevolence, as much as other concepts to which I referred before. Like other enablers, trust, privacy as well, solidarity is as such morally neutral insofar as it is not inherently good or evil. Even a group of criminals, for example, can share goals and an idea of perceived justice as well as risks and burdens. Despite this neutrality, however, solidarity has the power to foster collective action and risk-taking, and can therefore be conducive, depending on the use that we make of it, to morally good outcomes, and consequently to a general reinforcement and amelioration of the infraethical environment in which it operates. In what follows, I would like to show a concrete scenario in which solidarity can be employed in this way, which is data access and governance. In the present age, new problems arise as to how to analyze and organize the increasing amount of information that new technological devices allow us to obtain. The ontological and ethical consequences of big data are tightly connected to the topic of distributed morality, insofar as they require to move away from traditional moral concepts such as individual responsibility and decision-making, causality, culpability, and to envision forms of relational systemic morality. Development of network and information ethics has allowed researchers to deal with this modified scenario and to successfully tackle new ethical dilemmas stemming from it. The ethics of big data shows how moral responsibility is no longer entirely ascribable to individual agents, but is rather spread throughout a network of data generators, collectors, and users. Consequently, whilst concepts that have once been pivotal, like individual agency, lose their centrality, other phenomena, like, for example, network knock-on effects, i.e. the unintended consequences and collateral damage caused by actions within the network, become primarily important in this modified scenario. One of the sectors that the current setup has most profoundly altered is data access and security. How do we grant access to data in a responsible and productive way, i.e. without compromising, for instance, the property, security, and privacy of data owners and users? And also, what are the ethical guidelines that citizens and institutions should follow to make good use of their data? An example of how new digital data-driven technologies are altering established notions in this area is the phenomenon of group privacy. The collection and analysis of personal data involves the risk of privacy breach, which is traditionally prevented through processes of de-individualization. In other words, according to traditional privacy protocols, personal data can be collected as long as they are disjointed from the specific person who generated them. Although this process makes personal anonymization possible, it cannot guarantee group anonymization. This means that the individualized data still provide information regarding the opinion, habits, and tastes of social groups and population strata, which can be employed in a targeted way for specific purposes, for example, marketing or political campaigning. Big data technologies have the power to facilitate this process and to provide more and more fine-grained pictures of group characteristics, thanks to their ability to enhance hyperconnectivity and identify hidden correlations between data. This aspect raises huge ethical issues and requires consideration in the development of innovative and data-informed privacy policies. These and other aspects have substantially informed the design of new models of data access and governance. Traditional models of data access are defensive in nature and essentially anchored on the costs and risks of the data owner. This perspective implies that the primary aim of any data access strategy is to prevent malicious misuse, which results in the extensive use of worst-case scenarios and protection against hypothetical possibilities. A default close strategy underpins these models. Their developers start from the fundamental question, are we allowed to do this? Which is defensive insofar as it tends to interpret law regulations as a shield. The aforementioned technological advancements in the field of digital, data-driven technologies and the subsequent spreading of hyper-network societies, widely characterized by distributive moral framework, contributes to reveal the inadequacy of these default closed traditional models. Recent analytical reports, such as the Data Access Project developed by Felix Ricci and Elizabeth Green in 2016, exemplify an alternative approach to this matter. I will quote from this report. An alternative is to consider the law as one of the tools to be used in designing data strategies. The appropriate question is, how do I lawfully achieve what I want? And no longer are we allowed to do this. According to its developers, an evidence-based, default open, risk-managed, user-centered approach, the EDRU approach, has the power to substantially modify and improve the way in which data are owned and used. Now, the aim of this paper is not to provide an exhaustive analysis of the EDRU approach or of any other innovative model of data access, which might be informed by this distributed morality framework, which I tried to describe. Of all the traits that are central in the RU report approach, the one which is more relevant here is its focus on the collective and societal aspects and constraints of data access. According to this model, the relevant metric for costs and benefits of data access is no longer the data owner, but society, which corresponds to a community of interest between data owners and users. Therefore, the decision-making will not be grounded on individual agency and responsibility, but in line with the fundamental assumptions of distributed morality, will rather correspond to a balance of subjective probabilities. On the basis of these premises, this model establishes that data should be made available for research purposes if the extended benefit to society outweighs the potential loss of privacy for the individual. The most challenging question now is how to calculate this benefit. I contend that a solidarity-based approach would offer a decisive contribution to overcome this obstacle. In section 2, I characterize the solidarity as a principle that has the power to foster collective action and risk-taking, and that can therefore be conducive to morally good outcomes. This makes solidarity a moral enabler in an ethical environment. For the same reason, solidarity can also be seen as a valuable tool to identify what societal benefits are worth of individual risk-taking. In other words, analyzing the solidarity relations among the members of a determined society might help establish their willingness to shoulder burden and take risks. For example, to partially renounce their privacy by granting broader data access and release their personal data if this will be beneficial to a broader societal frame. In what follows, I would like to discuss with you this point, right? I don't have time here to further develop this hypothesis, but it will be very interesting for me to figure out whether this solidarity approach might actually be helpful to revolutionize or further improve the way in which we grant access to personal data in today's society. This is all. Thank you very much, and looking forward to the discussion in September. Thank you.